Thanks for turning up. There might be a few people drop in along the way. I hope so. But failing that, welcome to everyone. Ali was, I don't know if you guys, if Anita and Jenny know, but Ali was my guest on our podcast, the WestWords podcast, a little while ago. And then that's actually kind of gone gangbusters. A lot of people have downloaded that, guy. It's got some good numbers. So thank you, Ali.
That's okay. That's
so
good.
talk to us. What have you got for us tonight?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't sure of what we were going to be talking about, and I thought we'd just probably be free range.
Okay, let's be free range.
I like free range.
Free range. That was what James suggested. I was. Oh no, it was barn-fed poet.
The barn-fed poet is what I called you on the podcast.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't know. I don't really have anything except I'll read a poem or two, and we can just have a chat about, I guess, the world at large. Have you got any questions up your sleeve, James? I was kind of thinking you might have.
None that immediately come to mind, but they will drop in as we proceed, I imagine.
Okay. Well, shall I just read a poem?
Yeah, read us a poem. What have you got?
Yeah. All right. So I'll read this poem since we're talking about barn-fed poets with feathers, and we've talked about Jenny's bird tonight. I did actually think I would start by reading this poem called "Hate is a Thing Without Feathers." I'm not going to give any explanation. Let's just read the poem. Hate is a thing without feathers. I have always hated my thighs. Is hate too strong a word? If hate were a thing with feathers, I could hold my own gaze in the mirror longer than 3 seconds. When she first married him, the worst word my mother could think of to say was hate. She lived with him for 43 years. With time, her vocabulary grew significantly. Eventually, she was up there with the best of them, pulling one profanity after another from her once feather-lined throat, like albino rabbits from a magician's top hat. When I read Ben Lerner's poem and get to his line, every time breasts are described in the poems of men, a woman undergoes mastectomy, I glance down at my own, diminished since the starvation. From there, my eyes collapse onto the exhausted plateau of my thighs, spreading over the edges of my chair like pancake batter thrown carelessly into a cold frying pan by a disinterested chef. In the days before God was born, these thighs were so firm birds could have perched on them, lost themselves in the fertile plain of stoic vegetation that grew and grew and asked nothing in return. Hair no longer sprouts from their lukewarm inners now. Tumbleweed could blow through the sagging thigh gap I used to think was the meaning of life. What weighs more, 20 kilos of hate or 20 kilos of coal? In the daylight hours, I cover my thighs in black, sometimes blue. I wear my pants loose. I cannot bear to be contained in close quarters to my own skin. At night, I wear my mother's pajama bottoms, navy blue with clusters of tiny pink stars fizzing away like 1,000 champagne bubbles with nothing to celebrate. So that's a little dose of menopause. That's a little dose of menopause. You know, I don't even really particularly know what that's about, but it's about feathers anyway.
I like that little sidetrack. That little sidetrack you take our mind on when you mentioned disinterested chef, was it?
Yeah. Because I saw, it's just the idea of glancing down at your thighs. You may not suffer from this, James, but
I can't see my thighs.
What's obscuring the view?
my gut.
Yep.
Yeah, so you know, a lot of my poems are about menopause, death, grief, you know, regret, looking at, I guess, you know, the fairly common topics of poetry. I noticed when I was submitting this week that a lot of poetry journals had closed for submissions because they're overwhelmed with COVID poems at the moment.
Oh, really?
Have any of you guys found that?
No.
Yeah. I wasn't surprised to see it, but it was a thing. Like everybody's writing them, but
At risk of kind of you know, stoking that that stereotype, poets generally work on their own anyway, don't they?
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, you're in quarantine. Poets are in quarantine most of the time.
Quarantine, yeah, absolutely. You know, not a great deal changed for a lot of us who write. I know it's true.
I haven't sold a single extra book, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But nobody's buying my books anyway, so what can I tell you? Sorry, Anita.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's exactly true. I think it's such a private thing that we do with writing. And so it didn't change for a lot of us. I'm not a big workshopper or share my stuff and work in groups kind of person. So like for us, it was just business as usual, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you not share your stuff in workshops and stuff? And is that a conscious decision because you don't like doing that? Have you ever done that?
Look, no, I really haven't, but and I haven't gone to those things so much. And it's not because I don't like the people or I don't want to, I just feel like I hold that thing very much. I don't really want to share it until I'm comfortable to do that. I know a lot of people do. It's the same reason I don't really enter many prizes either. I don't really, I just find poetry, I've enjoyed just writing, you know, just having space to just quietly write, and it's quite nice. Yeah.
I feel the same as you, and I don't, I've never submitted to a prize.
No.
Because it seems, I mean, I know loads of people who have, and that's fine too, but I don't know how you can judge a poem. And so I can't offer up my baby for that judgment. I just can't do it. So I just rather not. I just would rather never win a prize.
But that's what you're doing when you get rejected over and over again. You keep offering it up for judgment. That's part and parcel of getting...
I mean, yeah, there's that. I feel as though submitting to a magazine is a little bit different. Because if a magazine might publish 20 poets or 30, so it's a cross section, whereas with a prize, it's a panel of maybe 5 judges who'll decide that this one
sometimes
poem out of the mountain, this is the best one. I don't really like.
I think there's a difference between. I think the whole notion of a prize, like I have once or twice been convinced by people to submit something, and I've always found myself feeling very uncomfortable about. I've only done it twice, I think, and I felt really uncomfortable both times. And I think it's because a prize implies that someone is placing the poems in some sort of hierarchical order. Not that I think mine should be on the top of that hierarchy or anything like that, but I just find that notion of doing that with art. It happens. Look, there are art prizes everywhere.
And I know that
good on people that do it. But
yeah, exactly. And I know that there's money to be won, and I think the chances of winning any money are probably less than being murdered.
I thought that was what it was about when I started. I went into a competition for a performance poetry prize, and I won it. I won $1,000.
Wow, that's unreal! My God.
And a little statue of Henry Lawson, and I thought, oh, this is what it's about. Yeah, I write poetry, and I'll win $1,000 again. No, I didn't.
Reality hit. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a bit like you, Anita. I just think I'm just really uncomfortable with the idea of somebody picking out one poem out of
Yeah,
thousands.
that's why I don't tend to enter where there's just one. I like to enter things where there's, 20 will be selected for publication in whatever.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Maybe one will win, but it doesn't matter if that person is.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, isn't it, with submitting your poem for a journal? Because if that gets rejected, you're like, well, you threw it in the hat. They only could publish 20, yours didn't. I think there's a different feeling about that whole thing. I never really get very daunted by getting rejected, which happens quite often from journals, but
Anita, do you feel that, I completely take your point with a single poem being, it's going to be very much down to taste and all the rest, but do you think there's more of a place for prizes in terms of collections of poetry? For example, do you think over the, I'm currently judging a big prize, not in poetry, in the other, and I wouldn't want to have to judge a single poem against other single poems, but I think that when you've got bodies of work or collections and a whole bunch of poems from one person in front of you and another person, you kind of get more of an impression of.
You do, yeah. That can be the case, but again, I think that, I think for me, it's just that notion that like each of those collections or bodies has a different voice, has a different person writing it, a different subject matter, whatever. And sometimes I think with judges, if it's a big panel of judges, maybe it's all right, I don't know, and diverse, but I just think, quite often you're up against the judges, kind of know what they want. Often I look at the judges or people that are selecting and I'll go, I look at their work and I just go, they'll never like my work. Like, and that's fine, because that's the whole, that's what the arts is. Like, but then there's no point.
And I guess this is why it's important to have people on those panels who are practitioners themselves. And I know that a writer friend of mine who's also an illustrator, his objection with the Children's Book Council for a long time was that the people who were doing the judging on the picture books were experts in children's books and librarianship and all the rest of it and writing, but none of them were actually trained artists, whereas most of the people who are doing the illustrations in the best quality picture books are, Lee Hobbs, for example, who does Mr. Old Tom and Mr. Chicken, these what look really easy and throwaway kind of stuff. He's a really, really accomplished fine artist. He studied at a very high level. And that was always my friend's objection, that the people who are judging it aren't. And I suppose that's why when you look at the Archibald, you see the People's Choice is never the same as the one that the actual jury chooses,
right.
is it? Yeah.
Been the problem too with the Arts Council. All those grants that have always been, it seemed, going to the same people, the same sort of writing, the same, it's very difficult because the judges have their own pre-opinions type thing.
Well, that's a conversation we can have another time when we're not recording it, because I was on literature board for 3 years. And it's no issue. It's just that the process may have changed since I was on it, but certainly when I was on it, it was incredibly transparent and
I think that's just been the gripe of people that have been turned away again and again.
It is. It's a common gripe, and I've lost friends over the process. And I had someone who contacted me and said, I didn't get a grant. And I said, no, you didn't. And he said, why not? And I said, because there was only so much money, and your application didn't get over the line that even warranted discussion, if you want me to be completely frank.
Yeah.
So, he said, when is it my turn? I said, maybe it's never your turn. It's not, not the fact that everybody eventually gets to get an Arts Council grant, it's down. And he said, the same people keep getting them. And I said, well, when they do, it's because they're writing the best applications. But it's complex, and I guess that's why we love art, that the grey of art rather than the black and white of, absolutes. If computers were choosing poetry awards, we'd all be reading ham airs, wouldn't we?
No, they'd be the computers would be writing it and then judging it.
That's right. Yeah, that's probably true.
I think I think the writing of a grant application is a whole skill in itself.
Of course it
Yes.
is.
And
I'll
everyone
never write one.
said to me, I applied once and I didn't get a grant, but it's fine. But I can see that my application was terrible. But and the amount of time I put into it, honestly, I worked on it for 6 weeks. Submitted
But
it.
isn't that like that's the case? It's like when I was working as a teacher, you know, people would say, you know, you should have got maybe that promotion, or not to me, but to anyone. But you know, your application wasn't really very good. And I'd be like, but you've seen how that person is in the school, but the application. So I just think applications is another whole ball game, you know.
Yes, yeah.
And there is a real skill in writing
There's a
grants
skill.
and pitches
Yeah.
and all those things. And
Yeah.
if I took anything out of that 3 years I spent on that board, it was that I learned how to write a pretty good application. Because I read so many dreadful ones.
Yes.
And I knew what caught my attention. I knew, because sometimes you'd have 250 applications in a category that you'd have to wade through, and only maybe 15 of those might get over the line. And so, you know, the night before the meeting, you'd be going, oh, I've got 20 more of these things to go through. You became very adept at working out quickly which ones were going to make the cut and which weren't.
Yeah.
When you've got that many to read, you do have to find a way to cut through it very easily.
Yeah. Can we do that and have another poem from Ali?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So what am I going to read now? Okay. Okay. We're going to do, this is a poem which is in 4 parts. I'm just going to read part 2. And it's called Not Much of a Mother, in 4 parts. Part 2. After the hysterectomy, my 70-year-old friend Hamish asked if it would affect my ability to have children. Under normal circumstances, I'd have laughed, taken out my highlighter, drawn a fluorescent yellow circle around his stupidity. This time I merely nodded, thanked him for asking, and the waiter brought the scones, the Danish, the strong black coffee. I ended up getting 2 cats. There were 6 kittens in the cage to choose from. I chose the 2 that sat alone in opposite corners to each other, each of them staring out into their own very separate horizons. I have always gravitated in the direction of lovelessness. This relationship I'm in now has love on demand. It is a 2-litre carton of full cream milk that sits in the fridge. There is no best before date, the level never goes down, and I have yet to pour my cornflakes into my morning bowl, only to open the fridge door and suffer the crushing disappointment of no milk. Sometimes I don't know what to do with love like this.
I read that. I remember that. That's lovely.
Yeah, I think I recorded
that
that
poem.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I love your metaphors in the banal, the kind of beauty in the banal of cornflakes and that sort of thing. I love that.
It's interesting because a friend of mine, poet Maggie Gibson, when she first read my work, she said, you know, Ali, it's daringly banal. The metaphors that you use are daringly banal. And I love that so much. I mean, it sounds like an insult, but I was really excited by that.
But Ali, that's the beauty of your metaphors. You are the absolute queen of the startling, refreshing, slap in the face metaphor, because we don't expect it, and it just comes out of the ordinary, and the ordinary is what makes it extraordinary. I really just think you're just your metaphors.
Thanks, Anita. Thank you so much for that. And I mean, it's not something that I sort of worked at doing it. These are just the ideas that come to me. Everything is very much rooted in the everyday. The
that is it.
fridge,
Perfect.
And whenever I mention food, it's always cheap food. It's never lobster or oysters. It's baked beans or
Chips.
Mars bars.
Can I read a poem about crab cakes?
Yeah! Is it yours?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, good.
This is from my trip when I was in the United States, and I went to Maryland for a conference, and Maryland is mad for its crab cakes. Everyone's like, "Oh, you want a crab cake? You would like a crab cake? Have a crab cake."
Is that right?
Yeah, so this, I don't even know if it's a poem. It's more like a little bit of dialogue.
Yeah, is it?
Sir, have you, it's called Maryland Crab Cakes. Sir, have you tried our crab cakes? No, I don't care for crab. But have you tried our crab cakes? Have you tried our crab cakes? No, I don't care for crab. But our crab cakes are the best. That's great, but I don't care for crab. You wouldn't say that if you tried our crab cakes. I think I still wouldn't care for crab. How do you know that? Because I've never cared for crab. You will after you try our crab cakes. I don't think I'll ever care for crab. Can we offer you a sample on the house? If I agree, will you stop telling me that I should care for crab? Oh, I won't need to tell you that. You should care for crab cakes. Why is that then? Because after trying our crab cakes, you'll love crab cakes, especially ours. All right, give me a damn crab cake. Excellent choice, sir. Sir, how was your crab cake? I don't really care for crab. That's actually a real conversation.
Is that like verbatim? Did you just write it?
No, that's pretty much the way the conversation went. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was just like, but everyone loves crab cakes, especially ours. Like, we're in a shack. We're in a shack. Like, it looks like a shack, so it must be good, right?
How funny.
It's great.
Who else?
Back to the real poets.
Come on. Who's going to read one, Jenny or Anita?
I'll read my COVID poem.
Yay!
So writing them, you can hear a new one.
Right.
We'll admire it from a distance.
Hey?
We'll admire it from a safe distance.
Okay. Absolutely. Absolutely. On the conspiracy bandwagon, we'll fight in our face masks with gloves, gowns and disinfectant wipes. We will never surrender this plague, this unseen enemy. Batten down, close the borders, send back the cruise ships. There is talk of war. We could cancel purchases of one new submarine or airplane, create free masks and sanitizer for all. Is COVID-19 fake news, a conspiracy, a 9/11 hoax, the virus manufactured in China or by the USA lab? The world is run by alien lizard people. Drain the swamp. Buy survivors' blood. Overreaction hurts the economy. Here, a Bill Gates global vaccine can control cellular communications via 5G, has the aim of killing millions. Torch the towers. The FBI warns 90 million, no, Facebook warns 90 million misinformation posts. The Australian government announced COVID-19 modelling now swarming and swanning around on a catwalk near you. In the Czech Republic, nudists are required to wear masks. Magical thinkers have a God that will heal the chosen, take you to heavenly rapture if prayer fails. A lonely busker sings, we'll meet again, to absent crowd. Wild animals invade empty city squares. Stay home, solitary healing. See light of clear skies, hear birdsong, breathe clean air, not pollution. Pause, plan, prepare. Not for the future past, but for new beginnings. It's a bit all over the shop, a bit like COVID.
I can see why you won that prize and $1,000 and a statue, because you're such a good reader of your work, Jenny.
Really
Well,
good.
I know.
Watched that a bit, but then again, there you go.
Oh, superb.
Will the statue still be standing in 150 years? That's the question.
Oh, no, they won't be pulling down Henry Lawson. Yes, of course. I can see it from here. It's only about 1.5 foot, but beautiful. Very proud of my Henry Lawson statue.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, Henry Lawson's one of my heroes. It's
Well, I could show you my statue.
Could you?
Yeah, I'll go and get it.
Let's see it. Let's see it.
Yeah.
Let's check it out.
Bring the statue.
Yeah, here comes the statue. I could even make it topple, but we won't because it's Henry
Don't do
Lawson.
that. No.
Oh my God, it's great.
Gotcha.
I love it.
Oh yeah, Henry.
Yeah, there he is.
Yeah.
Really
Oh,
good.
yeah.
Yeah,
Pretty
$1,000.
Very
Very
worthy.
Somebody came up to me afterwards and they said, "Did you really write that?"
Oh, really?
Yeah. Did you really write it?
Well, Jenny, I've got a story for you, which I think I told Ali, but I'm not sure. A few years ago, I was doing a workshop at the State Library of New South Wales, and for some kids. And afterwards, I was chatting with the curator, and I mentioned that I'm a big fan of Lawson. He said, "Oh, wait there, I've got something for you." Did I tell you this story, Ali?
No, I don't think so.
He said, "Wait there, I've got something to show you." And he went down to, he left the room, and he came back a bit later with 3 items. He had Henry Lawson's hat, Henry Lawson's pen, and the original page proofs of While the Billy Boils with Henry Lawson's red handmarks.
Wow. Yes.
And I couldn't touch them, of course, but they were sitting there on the table in front of me, and I'm just looking at them. And he told me a funny story. He said that as he got towards the end of his life, he was penniless and staggering from pub to pub across Western New South Wales and up and down Macquarie Street as well. And he'd go into a pub and he'd say, "Can I have a drink?" And they'd say, "Oh, come on, Henry, how are you going to pay for it?" And he'd say, "I'll write you a poem." So he'd get a napkin and he'd write one of his poems, just transcribe one of his own poems on it, and he'd sign it and give it to them. And they go, "Oh, that's good for you."
Yes.
So he'd take it and they'd take it.
Yes.
But now, as they're restoring all these old pubs across Western New South Wales, they keep discovering these napkins with Henry Lawson's poem and signature. And they come to the curator of the Mitchell Library and they're going, "Is this real?" And he go, "Yes, it is." Is this actually Henry Lawson's handwriting?" "Yes, it is." "Is that really his signature? He really wrote this?" "Yes, he did." "What's it worth?" And he goes, "Absolutely nothing. I've got about 1,000 of them out the back."
Yes. The power of the booze.
But having said that, I wouldn't mind having one on. They might be worthless, but I wouldn't mind having one on my wall. That's for sure.
No. Great story.
It's a fun story, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it is a good.
It's a very good story.
Anita, have you got something for us?
I do. I have a foodie poem. I was going to read this little.
Did you say a foodie poem?
A little bit food.
Okay.
A lot of my poems are about food. So this is a poem called Your Voice. It's kind of dedicated to my mother, my grandmother. After my mother passed away, I found a lot of old exercise books at her place full of recipes from our culture. We cook all the time. It's just how we are.
You mean people from Canberra?
Yeah, Canberra people.
That's
We
right. Yeah,
just
that's what I thought,
never
yeah.
stop cooking. So, yeah. So your voice. I riffle through your voice in fragile pages of old Malay exercise books, stained yellow as nicotine fingers. Fry spice till you feel like sneezing. And when that first tickle comes, add asam, salt, and kusum leaves. Then mix together 3 teacups of second milk from a freshly grated coconut with ground chilies, onion, and ginger. How much ginger? Just 1 piece, the size of your thumb. No use pointing out that my thumb is bigger than yours, or that I will be pulling ring tops off cans of coconut milk from an Australian supermarket. I will not be pounding spices in a mortar and pestle. The buzz and whir of a coffee grinder has replaced the dogged thump of stone on stone in my kitchen. but the faded ink of your voice speaks long forgotten words held somewhere in my mouth and heart. Bawang, Blachan, Sarai, Jintan. Nomadic syllables wafting among the pots and pans, sizzling the air with their fragrance.
Mm,
Very
nice.
Very nice. Did you see the movie The Lunchbox, Anita?
I did. The chilies on the basket going up.
And the auntie that you never see, and
The auntie that you never see.
Oh, we
And,
love that. We saw that at Glenbrook Cinema, and there's an Indian
it's
restaurant
beautiful.
right behind Glenbrook Cinema, and the first thing we did was right, let's go Indian. So,
Indian restaurant.
Absolutely, yeah.
After all those dabawalas, you have to go to the Indian restaurant. Yeah.
He died about 3 or 4 months
He died.
ago.
Irfan Khan died this year. Yeah, during COVID.
Yeah. Was he the
Yeah.
director?
Sorry?
Was he the director?
No,
the
the
actor.
main actor, Irfan Khan.
Okay, I haven't seen
Yeah.
him.
Terrific.
Oh, Ali,
I
see
think
the
it's
movie.
It's either on Netflix or it's on SBS at the moment, and I must watch it.
Oh, is it? Yeah,
Yeah.
you should check it out. It's and
movie.
get some take. If you're not going out, get some takeaway Indian, because you just need to have that aroma around you while you're watching it. It's really something. Smell-o-vision, we call it.
Yes.
Yes,
That
definitely.
film was beautiful, Anita. It was so lovely.
Yeah, it's a lovely film.
yes.
Lovely film.
Yes. World movies, Ali.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
And
there
yeah,
you go.
okay, I did notice it somewhere.
mm, yeah.
Gorgeous.
I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I like that. There was something very early on in that poem that really grabbed me. When you were going through the list of ingredients just before the gut,
Yes.
just before the ginger. What was it? It was a that's right. Fry it until you're about to sneeze. It's
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't
She
read that
actually
in-
writes it. This kind of stuff is
Oh,
written all the way through these
wow,
books.
Beautiful.
I like to note that you're taking it from a tin,
Yeah.
the coconut,
Yes.
from a little
I know.
sample
They
tin.
spend their lives grinding and grating stuff,
Yes.
though, my family.
Yeah.
You know what though, Anita? I grew up in Fiji, and I have been looking for my entire life for fish that tastes the same as the fish we used to get straight off the reef and cook on the fire on the beach, and I have not been able to find it anywhere. I can taste it right now, but I have not been able to find it. And I feel the same way when I open a can of coconut cream. It's just not the same as
Mm.
that second, as you say, the second milk from the
Second milk,
freshly
third milk.
grated
Yeah.
coconut.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
beautiful. It's this sort of
Yeah.
extra creaminess and coconut. And you'd think that coconut water would taste the same everywhere, but
No.
it just doesn't. It just
No, you have to have it fresh out of that. Anyway, we could, there's a lot of food and in our cultural memory, so it's nice to be able to share it anyway. Thank you.
That's beautiful.
Mm.
I know, it's beautiful how you weave it into the poem and how it's a recipe within a poem, memory with the poignancy and the sadness and the kind of longing.
Mm.
Really lovely.
Have you read Sartre's Sink? And a guy called Mark Crick wrote a book called Sartre's Sink that is home repair tips written in the style of different writers. But he did one that was Sartre's Soup. No, not Sartre's Soup. Someone's soup. Kafka's Soup. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've got Kafka's Soup. Yeah,
Yes,
I have got
fantastic.
that. I have got that book.
Ali, you'd really like have you seen it, Ali? It's got the
I've got it somewhere as well.
Yeah.
It's probably
I think we all got it at one time.
The Irvin Welsh How to Cook a Chocolate Cake.
Yes.
yeah, I must read it.
Chocolate, you can actually map, you put Marie. I can't understand if I can wear a scene.
Speaking of that one, a quick side note, did you end up watching Trainspotting 2, Jane?
I did.
Good. Did you like it?
Yeah, I did. Still think I prefer the first one.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've only seen the first.
Well, the second one is
Second.
not as horrific as the first one.
The first was
First
but
one is-
amazing.
Yeah.
Mm.
But anyway, James and I were talking about it last time we talked, and he had watched one, but he hadn't watched 2.
Because my daughter and I are working through the 100 movies you have to see before you die. I don't know what happens when you get to number 100, but presumably you drop dead. But one of the ones that she hadn't seen and I had was Trainspotting, so I introduced her to it, and she was quite blown away. Although she's got a baby about the same age as the one that dies in that first movie, and so she found that scene quite troubling.
Yeah.
What else have you got for us, Ali?
Well, we've had crab cakes, we've had curry, we've had COVID. I'll do a little bit of a food poem now. So
I love food. Bring it.
Yeah. This is In the Silence of the Custard. Night crept in, stumbled and fell at my feet. Badgers keeked from hedgerows, window wipers wiped, grouse tails flashed, Patsy Cline played on the stereo. I listened in the dark and fell to pieces. While you drove like a fuckwit up single lane roads that cut into the mountain like the waistband on a pair of too tight pants. The ugly woman behind the bar knew your name, took our coats, showed us to our table, and as you sat sleeveless, the solitary hair in your smallpox scar, corkscrewed from your upper arm like a mung bean on a sheet of damp paper, something of you finally stretching towards the light. You ordered the fish and chips. I ordered the same. I wanted you to see I was like you. And when the food came, we lifted our forks in unison, cracked through the batter of our steaming haddocks, lined up our chips on our buttered breads, added our too much salt, and in between gulps of our respective white teas, you asked me what kind of car I was driving now. I asked you about your greenhouse tomatoes. The thing is, I didn't know what it was. I couldn't quite say. And later, when we would order the apple pie with the hot crust and frozen middle in the silence of the custard, the closest I could come to it was, I don't hate you anymore.
I saw you do that before. I heard you do that before on. Oh my goodness! Thank you. Love it.
That's another one of mine that is always about the food. You know, the kind of the basics of food and the crappiest of food.
Yeah.
Well, what made you choose to go for greenhouse tomatoes after the car line? What was?
Well, because my father used to ring me twice a year. Would speak twice a year. And these were the only things he'd ask. What kind of car are you driving? And I didn't know what to ask him, so I would ask him about his greenhouse tomatoes, you know. So it was a sad situation. We didn't know what to say to each other. But, you know, that poem was, you know, we went for dinner on one of my trips back. And so that, I guess maybe it's just about sitting in those awful silences, not knowing what to say, and really, you know, the place that I had arrived at in myself was, I just don't hate you anymore. You know, that was as close as I could come to saying I love you. You know, I don't hate you. I mean, it's a big step forward, you know, in terms of my relationship with him and the history and all of that stuff. So
when you started reading it, I don't know if there was a clue early on that it was your father, but I didn't realise it was your dad until you started talking about him just then. And so I'll have to go back and listen to it again now, because I imagined a very different dynamic, because
it's interesting.
You and a guy sitting there, and and you're talking about, you're asking each other questions, but then you've got this history, but what? It just sort of threw me a little bit.
It means different things to different people, because people have said to me, "What's that about your relationship with, you know, Thomas?"
Yes.
Because it could easily be any of them, you know, and I guess it is whatever it is to the listener or to the reader.
You've written quite a bit about your father, and poignant poems, very powerful and poignant poems.
Oh, some of the.
I'm tempted to read a poem about my father, which is what I won the Henry Lawson statue for. Shall I go and get
Do it. Do it.
Are we
Do it.
Yeah, yeah,
Get it.
perfect. Oh, that's good.
But it's
I don't know
that
where-
constant dynamic in poetry, isn't it, Ali, between the reader, the writer, and the reader, the writer, and the poem. And it's kind of like whatever we take
Yeah.
from it, we take it.
Yeah.
But,
As somebody said to me once, it doesn't matter what, you know, once you've written it and put it out there, it's not up to you anymore.
No.
And nobody needs to understand the intricacies of my relationship. It's whatever that says to
And that's the beauty of poetry, because it
so.
does
Yeah.
speak to someone else.
And you know, certain poems will find you and you'll understand one thing from them, and then the next year you might understand something quite different. But
yeah.
I mean, I think Martin Longford said once, it's not poetry's job to explain.
Yes.
And I thought that was such a beautiful way to even, you know, approach poetry, because, you know, in the beginning one can imagine you need a beginning, a middle and an end, and in fact you don't. It can just be one moment in time within an experience, and I think that's why I love poetry so much.
Like that Basho haiku, the frog ponders the lily pond. Plop. That's it.
Yeah, that's right. And it's ways. And also I read Clive James. He used to write a column in the Guardian or the Times or something about poetry, and at one point he quotes a beautiful stanza from a poem, and he said, I read this stanza so regularly and I love it so much, and I have no idea what it's about.
That is what poetry is. It makes no sense, but it makes all the sense.
All the sense. It's everything and it's nothing. It's trivial and it's important. It lives in this kind of space.
And each time you read it, I always feel like I'm reading a poem for the first time, because you're bringing a different self to it. You know.
Yeah.
So I mean, all of that is in very good poetry, which is yours.
Yeah.
So I love it.
Okay.
Jenny,
Okay. This is from my book, Swimming Underground.
Lovely.
Visitor at home. On the toilet, reading a book on pilots and planes. Final flight. His heart stopped. A swift departure. My father had his album from the Air Force in New Guinea filled with photos of planes and native women, planes and naked breasts, and him too young, filling up parachute spaces with scotch to sell to Yankees for profit. He crashed once in the jungle, was lost for days in humid heat. I remember scrubbing his broad back again and again, making it red and hot and sudsy smooth. A big man, he spread his real estate salesman self all over the flat plains in 5 different patterns, Cape Cod and others. Scattered seed too with the neighbour's wife and girls he could get wherever possible. Did patterns sprout up in other families? He retired back to the country of graziers, the sea and clubs, Les Murray landscape, dry, heat-shimmer roads through paddocks at the back of the Gloucester buckets, happier with his sisters and in his bowling whites, beer in hand, new car in the garage he wouldn't take out at Christmas. Those Mexicans down south there, they're too many of them. I mean, they're maniacs, can't bloody drive. So he stayed inside till they left. We sang hymns and red poppies were placed upon his coffin as his mates claimed him. He was always theirs anyway. A visitor at home, brawling with mum, waiting to go back to the club, be with men who understood the way of wars.
Wow.
Daddy.
It's beautiful.
My daddy. Yes. None comes to understand much more.
Well, I'm going to see your war poem and raise your war poem.
Oh,
Okay.
It's not really a war poem at all. It's
Yeah, no.
But this is one of the poems that I was accused of being a warmonger for when I read it at the Poetry Slam, and it was from my American trip when you stand at Robert E. Lee's house, which is at the top of the Antietam Cemetery, and not the Antietam Cemetery, the big one, the big military cemetery there.
Oh, yeah. I know.
Arlington Cemetery.
Darlington, yeah.
Yeah, so it's right at the top of the hill, and you look down across John F. Kennedy's grave across the Potomac, and then you see the Lincoln Memorial, and then the mall and the Washington Memorial beyond that, and the White House on just to the left of that. And Robert E. Lee was never allowed to. He wasn't even buried in his own state because it was a final insult to him, or the final insult they gave him, because he was not necessarily pro-slave. He wasn't pro-slavery, but he was determined not to turn against his native state. And once Virginia chose the South, he felt he had no option but to go to the South, even though Lincoln had asked him to command the Union troops. So this was something I wrote after I'd stood on his front porch looking across Washington. It's called A View from Robert E. Lee's House. Ghosts are here back in those rooms behind me. The grand entry, the drawing room, lined with his wife's art, where he must have sat with her in this white house on the hill where she was raised and they were married. He'd have told her of his meeting at the other big white house, nestled by the grey Treasury building in the middle distance, and of the offer made. How can I, he'd have said, and Mary would have nodded. She too was Virginian through and through, and doubtless the slaves, made literate now by her kindness and Christian charity, brought the tea as Mr. Lee, sir, and ma'am talked into the night, and at dawn they might have walked slowly arm in arm, leaving footsteps on the dewy lawn where white crosses and stars and crescents now gather in regimental rows, to hear him say, Mary, how can I draw my sword upon Virginia? On this porch I see him standing, hands clenched behind, as in the house Mary, with her lamp and needlepoint, sings softly of her aching bones in the old Virginia shore, and muttering ghosts of slaves learned to read by candlelight behind the house. And he gazed across the Potomac past a place where a great marble shrine would one day gleam in memory of the man he would soon stand proudly before. Thank you, Mr. President, but how can I draw my sword upon my native state?
Nice. Yeah, there's so much history coming out now.
Yeah, and Robert E. Lee's own great grandnephew or something came out the other day and said, pull the bugger statues down. I don't.
Yes.
Because a lot of those statues were only put up in the 1960s as a response to the civil rights movement. Anyway, they're not actually historical statues.
No.
Yeah, I love that poem. I heard you read that before, James. I love it.
Well, can I share one more from that thing? This is because I went to Gettysburg as well, and I went for a walk early in the morning at Gettysburg, and my mate was back in the room, and I just I came across this guy who was just walking slowly, this older guy, and we had a chat, because I'll talk to anyone at any time, and and this one's called, it's very short, it's called Morning Meeting. He tells me that this is his sacred place. He tells me that he comes to Gettysburg twice a year. He tells me that he's been almost 40 times. He tells me that he's travelled all over, but this is still his sacred place. He tells me that his wife never came to this, his sacred place. He tells me that she had no time for this macho war nonsense. He tells me that he was here in Gettysburg when his wife died back home in Montgomery, Missouri. He tells me that he'd kissed her goodbye without a thought that it might be the last time. He tells me that he still comes to Gettysburg twice a year and cries for his dead wife back home in Montgomery.
Oh, wow. Yeah, nice.
So, Anita, have you got something for us? My computer's going to go flat any minute, so we're going to probably have to finish on time.
Okay, I'll just do a tiny one. Only because you said you were from Fiji, born in Fiji.
I grew up in Fiji, yeah.
Or grew up in Fiji. So this little poem is Cane Cutter's Bride, Museum of Fiji. Suddenly you accost me with silent sepia eyes, a sallow smudge of newsprint, hidden among weapons and bones. You shrink and flutter like a frightened bird, trapped in the crimson mesh of your wedding sari. I am caught in your dark gaze, in the tattered trace of hands and face, ragged remnants of a fragile gift, carefully wrapped and dispatched with good wishes to an alien land.
Mhm. Mm.
Yeah, it's nice.
Mm.
So, in Fiji, though, in the museum, there were just these newspaper pictures of the brides brought out for the cane cutters. And I was just thinking it could have been my grandmother, but it wasn't because we're not Fiji. But like that could have been her. Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
And we're of course seeing all those sorts of stories. Hopefully you're going to get an airing now across Australia as well, because Scott Morrison almost by accident raised people's awareness of the cane cutters of North Queensland, who everyone's like, Wendell Saylor, he's Indigenous, but he doesn't,
but doesn't look.
Yeah, that's right. He doesn't look Indigenous.
Not slave though.
But he's not a slave. No. He was his family was just brought out here against their will and forced to work for very little money, but he wasn't a slave.
Or maybe no money, but it doesn't matter.
No, that's right. Or no money. You say potato, I say potato.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Ali, we're going to have to wrap up in a second. Have you got one more for us?
Oh yeah, cool. Okay.
Bring it, Ali.
Do a quick one.
Yeah.
Well, just I don't know if there's food in this. Yeah, there is food in it. Anyway, I'll read
anything.
The title poem, which is "The Lactic Acid in the Calves of Your Despair."
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Let me pour tea into the holes of your grief. Add drops to your eyes now emptied of tears. Wrap your wounds in gauze soaked overnight in my deepest concern. Let me wring out the sleeves of your thick woolen jumper, now drenched in the song of your mourning. Let me peg it to dry in what little sun there is. Let me utter sounds that comfort, make tea that soothes. Let me know all I can say is, I'm so sorry. Here, drink this tea. Then the sorry thing again. Let me wave you off from the base of the grampians of your anguish, fill your backpack with squares of dark chocolate and emergency dried fruit nourishment. You will need it along the way. Know as you climb, your calves will burn with the lactic acid of your despair. Breathe into your pain. Know it will recede. Sit down a while and drink from the tartan thermos of your healing. And when you reach your cairn, lean into the wind. Look down into your valley of loss. Marvel at the distance you have covered, at how far you have come.
Bravo.
It's beautiful. I love that.
Bravo.
Thank you so much.
Well, guys, thank you so much for coming along. I'm sorry that there weren't more people here. I promise there will be next time. So if you want to come back, you're always very welcome to join
I
us.
would have come anyway, because I don't get the treat of hearing, Ali read, but also it was such a lovely conversation. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for coming.
It was lovely, guys. Thanks for coming and listening.
It's absolutely lovely.
So I'll let. I think Ali's on my email list, but I'll just send a reminder through about a week before the next one, and she might pass it on to you guys and just let you know that we've got Malla Nunn as our guest.
Yes, excellent.
If you wanted to come along, you'd be very welcome to come along and read some stuff and have a listen to what she has to say, because she's a very engaging speaker.
Oh, good.
So thank you for sharing and thanks for coming, guys. Appreciate it.
I've enjoyed.
Thank you. Thanks, Ali.
Thanks, guys. It's lovely to see
you. Thanks. Lovely to meet you, Jennifer.
Bye.